The American Revolution was the culmination of years of growing discontent, a fervent desire for independence, and the pursuit of freedom. It was not merely a rebellion against taxes, but a battle for a sense of identity and self-determination. The seeds of revolution were planted in the hearts of American colonists who, by the mid-18th century, had come to realize that their interests and values were no longer aligned with the British Crown. By the time the Revolution began, tensions between the American colonies and Britain had reached a boiling point. It wasn't just the taxes, such as the Stamp Act, Townshend Acts, and the Tea Act, that upset the colonists. It was the sheer lack of representation and autonomy that they faced. While Britain imposed these taxes to help pay off war debts from the French and Indian War, the colonies had no voice in the decisions made in Westminster. The slogan, "No taxation without representation," became a rallying cry, reflecting the growing sentiment that the American colonists deserved the same rights and freedoms as their fellow British citizens. This growing unrest eventually boiled over in 1770, with the infamous Boston Massacre, an event that saw British soldiers open fire on a crowd of colonists, killing 5. While tensions had simmered for years, this tragic event served as a catalyst for a deeper resistance to British rule. Propaganda spread throughout the colonies, painting the British soldiers as tyrants and further solidifying the colonists' resolve to fight for their rights. The situation worsened with the 1773 Boston Tea Party, where American colonists, disguised as Native Americans, boarded British ships and dumped an entire shipment of tea into Boston Harbor as a protest against the Tea Act. This act of defiance prompted the British government to retaliate with a series of punitive measures, known as the Coercive Acts or Intolerable Acts, which further inflamed colonial resentment. These laws not only closed Boston Harbor, but also limited self-government in Massachusetts and allowed British officials accused of crimes to be tried in England. In response, the American colonies convened the First Continental Congress in 1774, an assembly of representatives from all 13 colonies. While many sought to restore peace and avoid outright rebellion, it was clear that the colonies had reached an impasse with the British Crown. The Continental Congress sent petitions to King George III, requesting the restoration of their rights as Englishmen. However, King George refused to address the colonies' grievances, dismissing their pleas and instead opting for further military action to quash the unrest. By 1775, it became apparent that the path to reconciliation had narrowed to the point of no return. The British military, under the leadership of General Thomas Gage, began to mobilize troops in response to the growing unrest in the colonies. The British government feared that the colonies would revolt, and so they set out to seize colonial weapons and ammunition, further escalating tensions. On April 18, 1775, British soldiers began their march toward Concord, Massachusetts, to confiscate weapons stored by the colonial militias. But the colonists were prepared. They had long anticipated this moment, and a network of spies and messengers, including Paul Revere, alerted the colonial militias to the British advance. At the battles of Lexington and Concord, the first shots of the Revolutionary War were fired. The British soldiers encountered resistance from local militias, and by the end of the day, the British had suffered significant casualties. Although the British forces were victorious in the skirmishes, the colonists had made it clear that they would no longer be passive subjects of British rule. The confrontations marked the beginning of full-scale conflict, and the seeds of rebellion had now firmly taken root. In the wake of these skirmishes, the Second Continental Congress convened in May 1775. This time, the tone of the debate was different. Some still hoped for reconciliation with Britain, while others, like John Adams of Massachusetts, argued that the colonies should take up arms and formally declare independence. The delegates were divided, but as the British military continued to tighten its grip on the colonies, the mood shifted toward resistance. George Washington, a respected leader and military veteran of the French and Indian War, was appointed commander-in-chief of the Continental Army. Washington's leadership would prove critical, as he united a group of amateur soldiers who were committed to the cause, but still lacked the formal training and experience necessary to take on the well-established British military machine. The Continental Army was ill-equipped and outnumbered, but Washington's leadership and the will of the people kept the revolution alive. The Americans were not only fighting a conventional war, but a psychological battle as well. They were fighting not just for freedom from oppressive taxes, but for their right to self-govern, to build a society where the voice of the people could be heard. Washington's first major test came during the Siege of Boston, where the Continental Army laid siege to the British troops occupying the city. The Americans faced an uphill battle. While they had the advantage of local knowledge, the British military was far more experienced and well-equipped. However, in early 1776, the Americans gained a strategic victory when they forced the British to abandon Boston. This victory was a major morale booster for the revolutionaries, and it demonstrated that, with determination and unity, they could stand against one of the world's most powerful militaries. However, victory in Boston did not end the conflict. The British were far from defeated, and their response was swift and brutal. They shifted their attention to the Middle Colonies, particularly New York, where they planned a major military campaign. By August 1776, the British had launched an invasion of New York City, a city of immense strategic importance. The British forces, under General William Howe, landed on Long Island and pushed the Continental Army into retreat. The battle for New York was a crushing defeat for Washington's forces, and by the end of the year, the British controlled much of New York. Despite these setbacks, Washington's army was far from broken. The Americans, led by Washington, had a unique advantage. The British were stretched thin, attempting to control a vast territory that spanned from the northern colonies to the southern colonies. Meanwhile, the American cause was unified by the promise of freedom and the belief that they could create a new nation, one that was not beholden to the whims of a distant king. In the months that followed, Washington's forces faced numerous challenges. However, his leadership, along with the support of the French, who were growing more sympathetic to the American cause, kept the revolutionary spirit alive. The French, under King Louis XVI, had long harbored animosity toward Britain, and they saw the American Revolution as an opportunity to weaken their longtime rival. The battle for independence was far from over. As the war continued, both sides endured tremendous losses, and it became clear that this conflict would not be decided through one or two decisive battles. Rather, it would be a long, drawn-out struggle, fought not only on battlefields, but in the hearts and minds of the American people. For the Americans, every victory, no matter how small, was a step closer to their ultimate goal: freedom from British rule. As the year 1776 came to a close, the future of the American colonies hung in the balance. The Revolutionary War had only just begun, and the outcome was uncertain. But what was certain was that the American colonists would no longer be passive subjects. They were prepared to fight for their rights, their freedom, and their independence. The war had begun in earnest, and there was no turning back. As the year 1776 drew to a close, the American Revolution had entered a crucial phase. The Continental Army, led by General George Washington, had faced numerous setbacks, particularly in New York. However, resolve remained unbroken, and the spirit of rebellion surged as the colonists continued their struggle for independence. The British, despite their military superiority, found themselves in a precarious situation. They had underestimated the resilience of the American people and the growing international support for the revolution. The turning point came in the winter of 1777. The Continental Army, though battered and worn, had a momentous victory at the Battle of Saratoga. This battle, fought in upstate New York, became one of the most significant turning points in the war. The British forces, led by General John Burgoyne, were decisively defeated by American forces under the command of General Horatio Gates and Benedict Arnold. The American victory at Saratoga not only boosted morale, but also had profound international consequences. The French, who had been secretly aiding the Americans since 1776, were now fully convinced that the revolution could succeed. In early 1778, they formally entered the war on the side of the United States, signing the Treaty of Alliance. France's involvement brought much-needed resources, including soldiers, naval support, and financial aid. The French Navy's intervention, in particular, would prove crucial in the later stages of the war, especially at the Battle of Yorktown. The alliance with France marked a dramatic shift in the balance of power. The British, who had been confident in their ability to suppress the American rebellion, now found themselves facing a multi-front war. Not only did they have to contend with the American forces on the ground, but they also had to deal with the French Navy on the seas. This international dimension of the conflict would prove to be the key to American victory. As the war progressed, the British focused their efforts on the southern colonies, hoping to rally loyalists to their cause and weaken the American rebellion. The British scored a series of victories in the Southern Theater, capturing cities like Savannah and Charleston. However, they struggled to gain the widespread support they had hoped for among the colonial population. Many of the Southern colonists remained loyal to the American cause, and British efforts to secure the region were hampered by guerrilla warfare and the support of local militias. One of the most pivotal moments of the war came in 1781 at the Siege of Yorktown in Virginia. General Cornwallis, the British commander in the Southern Theater, had taken refuge in the coastal town of Yorktown, where he believed he could be resupplied by the British Navy. What he didn't anticipate was the speed and coordination with which the American and French forces would strike. General Washington, with the help of French commanders such as General Rochambeau, laid siege to Cornwallis's position, trapping him on three sides. The French Navy, under Admiral de Grasse, blocked any British reinforcements from reaching Cornwallis by controlling the waters off the coast. The British were now caught in a no-win situation. Cornwallis, facing imminent defeat, was forced to surrender on October 19, 1781. The American and French victory at Yorktown was a decisive blow to British hopes of maintaining control over the American colonies. Though the war didn't officially end for another 2 years, this surrender effectively marked the end of British efforts to suppress the American Revolution. The British had no choice but to begin negotiations for peace. In 1783, the Treaty of Paris was signed, officially recognizing the United States as an independent nation. The treaty not only secured American independence, but also established generous borders for the new nation, stretching from the Atlantic Ocean to the Mississippi River, and from Canada in the north to Florida in the south. The victory had been hard-won, but the Americans had achieved what many had thought impossible. They had broken free from the British Empire and established a republic based on the principles of liberty and self-governance. The American Revolution's impact extended far beyond the borders of the newly formed United States. The victory inspired revolutionary movements across the globe, from France to Latin America. The ideas of liberty, democracy, and self-determination, which had fueled the American Revolution, resonated with people living under oppressive monarchies and colonial systems. The French Revolution, which began in 1789, was directly influenced by the success of the American Revolution. Revolutionary movements in countries such as Haiti, Mexico, and Argentina were also inspired by the ideals of the American Revolution. The American Revolution had not only succeeded in freeing the American colonies from British rule, but had also become a symbol of hope and inspiration for oppressed people everywhere. It showed that it was possible to overthrow a powerful empire, to fight for a better future, and to establish a government that represented the will of the people. The revolution's success proved that democracy was not just an ideal. It was a practical system of government that could thrive even in the face of overwhelming odds. Despite the revolutionary victory, the challenges for the United States were far from over. The newly formed country had to build its government from scratch. The Articles of Confederation, the first Constitution of the United States, proved to be inadequate in providing a strong central government. The nation faced economic instability, internal divisions, and the challenge of uniting a diverse group of states under a single, functioning government. However, the victory in the Revolution provided the foundation upon which future generations would build a stronger, more unified nation. In 1787, the U.S. Constitution was drafted, creating a new framework for governance that balanced the power of the federal government with the rights of the states. The Constitution, along with the Bill of Rights, would become the guiding principles of American democracy for centuries to come. The American Revolution also set the stage for the United States to become a global power. With independence secured, the country could now focus on expanding westward, establishing trade relationships and growing its influence on the world stage. The victory over Britain gave the United States the confidence to take its place as a rising power, one that would shape the course of world history for generations. The success of the American Revolution was a testament to the power of ordinary people coming together to fight for their rights and freedoms. It was a revolution not just of armies, but of ideas. The principles of liberty, equality, and fraternity that guided the revolution would continue to resonate around the world, sparking other movements for justice and freedom. America's victory over Britain was not just a national triumph. It was a triumph for the values that would define the modern world.